30 years, give or take, after Hokusai painted the Great Wave, something dramatic happened in Japan. Commodore Matthew C. Perry arrived in Tokyo Bay with four transitional warships. They had these towering masts rigged for a full set of sails, but sticking out of the middle of the wooden deck was a giant smokestack, and there were these huge circular housings on the sides for steam-driven paddle wheels. The Samurai Coast Guard actually fired on that four-ship squadron from their antiquated bronze cannon. The shells flew over the ships and landed in the ocean. Perry ignored them. On shore, he explained he was not leaving until a letter from President Fillmore was delivered to the Emperor. Then, explaining he was going to celebrate America's independence, it was after all July 4th, he fired blank shells from all 77 ship cannons simultaneously. The natural acoustics of Tokyo Bay, then Edo Bay, amplified the volley, and everyone in the city was impressed. Sake was spilled, rice scattered, panic ensued. Perry demanded that all Japanese ports be open to American ships year-round. He said he would be back in a year with a bigger squadron. Then, after explaining he had some important engagements elsewhere, as Navy Commodores often do, he just left.
I was just wondering about that. Like I said to my sister the other day,
This was
you should
followed
never
by a lengthy discourse among the samurai on various topics such as crops, qualities of certain types of sake, and generally on what to do now. By the elite's choice, Japan had been cut off from the world's affairs for a century and a half. Their weaponry was, well, those quaint cannon, plus the legendary swords, and some matchlock muskets from the 17th century, designed originally by the Dutch and much improved by Japanese craftsmen thereafter. Back in the 17th century, they were way ahead of their time and finally made. But in the year of our Lord, 1854, they were antiquated junk compared to what the rest of the world triumphantly wielded and was strangely proud of. You know, proud of this, proud of that. Pride is a sin. It's what drove us out of the Garden of Eden in the first place, and why the Son of God had to sacrifice himself to repair the situation. Some sober thinkers proposed that the country should open trade, master Western engineering, specifically the military tech, and build up Japan's strength until it could stand as an equal global power. As expected, this enraged the opposition. Skirmishes occurred, insults flew freely, fingers pointed, accusations were leveled, the country was once again on the brink of a civil war, and the farmers, artisans, and merchants were once again wondering why the elite was always hell-bent on involving them in their affairs. At that most propitious moment, Commodore Perry returned with time to spare and with 8 ships this time. The Treaty of Kanagawa was signed, no shots had been fired, the ports opened, the entire political structure of the country changed practically overnight.
And the feast?
Yes, the Americans were asked to partake in the little celebratory dinner. They sampled and praised the fish, the rice, and the sake. Following which, the more prominent members of the Japanese elite were invited on board Perry's ship, where they were treated to poultry, pork, beef, vegetables, oceans of champagne and whiskey, and perhaps some music as well, I don't know. By the end of this feast, this is well documented, the delegation members were dancing and hugging American officers. It must have been one hell of a party. Thus began the Meiji period, the 4 decades of architectural, artistic, technological glory. It didn't start smoothly. The shogunate did not wish to be dismantled. They put up a fight, and the Civil War did start in earnest and went on for a year. In the meantime, folks who had more important things to do than rushed to the battlefield to demonstrate their prowess, rushed to Europe and the United States instead to learn the latest techniques, while European and American specialists were invited to Japan. One of the results of this transcontinental and transoceanic cultural exchange was the sudden vogue in France for everything and anything Japanese. All kinds of bric-a-brac, souvenirs, memorabilia, postcards, in other words, tchotchkes, were viewed eagerly and purchased enthusiastically at
Wow,
specialized
look at that.
stores.
That's amazing.
Because Japanese doodling struck the French and the Americans as, well, exotic, some Western artists began to, I wouldn't say imitate it, it was just like they stylized a lot of things. Like James McNeill Whistler began to sign his paintings with the image of a butterfly, claiming it was inspired by Japanese ceramics. An entire philosophical base was created by folks who now had the evidence that the Far East was, well, had levels of depth, culture, spirit, and wisdom that exceeded any achievements you could find west of the Ural Mountains. Anything Western was perceived as old, stale, dated. Anything Japanese was profound, intricate, captivating, deeply touching, and so forth. Many Europeans and Americans visited Japan and were delighted. Nonetheless, to the surprise of many, the vast majority of them chose to return to what they perceived as the old and stale West. But that's a minor issue, I suppose. Back to Japan. Unsurprisingly, mistakes were made. Local Meiji architects weren't there yet, while foreign specialists blundered often. For instance, William Kinemund Burton, a Scottish engineer, designed, with the help of some others, the first skyscraper in Japan, Ryonkaku, 12 floors. The design was deeply flawed, which isn't to say that he reckoned without one of the principal fun features of life in Japan, which is earthquakes. It's not like he didn't know he was building in a seismic zone. All of Japan is a seismic zone. The problem was the sheer technological hubris of the late 19th century. The octagonal shape tapering towards the top was considered super stable. And the sheer weight of all those bricks was supposed to hold the thing together during earthquakes. Just look at those, like pyramids in Egypt, right? Well, the pyramids that are still standing today are made with granite and limestone, not brick. To be sure, brick pyramids did exist, and all of them collapsed within a couple of centuries of their construction, some within years. Seismic activity in Egypt exists, but it's mostly low to medium tremors, like echoes from whatever's going on in the middle of the Mediterranean. The problem with unreinforced brick masonry of that height, 12 floors, is that it may be delightfully heavy and everything, but it has zero tensile strength. It cannot hold itself together when the ground starts shaking like the frying pan in which your favorite chef is making you a proper French omelette. So when that nasty earthquake hit 50 years later, the building crumbled. It was so severely damaged it had to be demolished. That said, let us note in passing that the tower wasn't your typical European or American design. Japanese motifs were quite obvious. Japanese architecture was born.
Earlier?
I stand corrected, yes. It was born a bit earlier. A British architect, Josiah Conder, arrived in Japan when he was 24 years old and was hired by the Meiji government to serve as the first professor of architecture at the Imperial College of Engineering. Soon he became the mentor of talented future Japanese architects, and he was no slouch himself. Still, hubris is a horrible thing, really. Some of his projects were failures. He was more successful when he finally remembered some of the universal Vitruvian principles: strength, function, beauty. All three imply that what you build should be in keeping with the environment, should fit seamlessly into it. Strength, stability, he finally began to reinforce his buildings with steel structures. Now that was a breakthrough, at least for him, which is why the Mitsubishi office building still stands, as does the Tsunamachi Mitsui Club building. And the Tokyo Resurrection Cathedral, a Russian Byzantine church initially designed by a Russian architect named Mikhail Shchurupov, but taken over, modified, and finished by Conder, who added the bell tower. It's a bit too stocky and, well, garish to my taste anyway, but it's undeniably neither fully Greek nor Russian. It is Japanese architecture. Now, Tatsuno Kingo was one of Conder's students, many of whom would eventually out-engineer their mentor. Tatsuno designed, among other things, the original Tokyo train station. Impressive, isn't it? He also designed the Bank of Japan head office, which at first blush is just generic neoclassicism, right? You can see buildings of this sort all over the world. But look a little closer. The entire building is organized around a large, airy central courtyard that dominates the spatial plan. This follows the deep-seated logic of the traditional Japanese residential and elite built environment, Minka and Shinden-zukuri, which is organized from the inside out. The ground floor is clad in heavy granite, the classic Western institutional choice. However, the upper floors transition to a dark greenish-gray volcanic rock called andesite. It's a porous, highly irregular volcanic stone that behaves beautifully in humid and wet Japanese weather, deepening in color when it rains, gives the upper half of the bank a weathered organic texture. Now, to safeguard it against earthquakes, Tatsuno laced the interior masonry with a dense, interlocking matrix of iron tie rods and anchors. The stone skin is a costume. The building's actual structural behavior relies on tension, flexibility, and a network of joints that allow it to absorb and distribute seismic energy. It is a canonical masonry palace engineered with the soul and kinetic philosophy of a 5-story wooden pagoda. Unmistakably Japanese. Unfortunately, when the pseudo-architectural ugly growth movement began to befoul and besmirch the entire planet in the 1960s, they erected so much steel and concrete manure around this Bank of Japan building that you can't truly appreciate it just by looking at it. Most of the advantageous sight lines are blocked.
That's a shame.
Yes, it is. Now, Katayama Takuma, another one of Conder's students, designed a whole bunch of things, and here's his Nara National Museum. Note the blind windows on that wall? A safety measure, minding earthquakes, strengthening the wall, unmistakably Japanese. Simultaneously, fields other than architecture were also moving forward by leaps and bounds. Visual arts were suddenly a big deal. Artisans had always been there, but now there were artists. Specifically, Kuroda Seiki produced a number of genuine masterpieces. The technique is canonical, nothing stylized, no annoying dragons, no views from an elevated position. It's unapologetically realistic, all of it. The execution, however, is clearly Japanese, elegantly understated, a bit wistful. Japanese literature flourished, it was suddenly world-class. But that may be a story for a different video. 4 decades later, 2 events suddenly put an end to all this. One was this great earthquake that completely ruined Asakusa and its adjoining entertainment district, Yoshiwara, the neighborhoods where Japanese bohemians mostly lived and hung out. In the hours following the quake, with Tokyo in flames and communications severed, the civilian government was paralyzed. The military stepped in, declaring martial law. Soldiers took control of the streets. set up checkpoints, and divided the city into military zones. And not waiting for the dust to settle, the military used this opportunity to eliminate their political opposition.
Aesop lives.
He sure does, helping out the First Amendment. Then the global Great Depression paid a visit and triggered the official military takeover, beginning with the invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and quiet elimination of civilian prime ministers. Writers, artists, and architects were forced into rigid and utterly joyless alignment with the current state ideology. The state used Toko, the ideological enforcement agency, to subject artists to psychological pressure, isolation, and imprisonment until they saw reason and did as they were told, wrote as they were told, painted as they were told. Forget those wistful sunsets and romantic poses, all that outdated maudlin nonsense. This is Japan. In architecture, the regime faced a fascinating ideological paradox. They were determined to project this anti-Western identity, but they also needed their state buildings to be up-to-date, fireproof, and capable of surviving earthquakes and displaying imperial strength. The solution was the imperial crown style. The formula was blunt, literal, and highly theatrical. Build a modern stripped-down neoclassical or Art Deco reinforced concrete structure, and then slap a traditional curved tile castle roof, Iriomoya Zukuri, right on top of it. Here's the Nagoya City Hall, built in 1933. And this is the Tokyo National Museum, built in 1937. Prefectural Government Building, 1938.
Not very attractive.
They aren't. Today, though, architecture as a human endeavor is gone. Boxy provisional stuff is in, just like in the rest of the world. Lego models instead of buildings. There's also some mock stuff, like those mock churches, fake churches, faux churches, if you will. Even though actual real churches do still function in Japan, they build these faux churches to serve as Western-style wedding venues. That's an extremely poor taste, if you ask me, but also kind of naive, wouldn't you say? But the Meiji period, they organized, they encouraged, they built, they produced as only the Japanese know how. And they had those 4 glorious decades during which they achieved what it normally takes other cultures and other countries centuries to achieve. If you're interested in looking at the world through a slightly different lens, consider subscribing to my Patreon. It consists entirely of videos on subjects other than architecture, covering history, culture, science, space exploration, movies, opera, theology, economics, and many more. Subscribing is the best way to support the independent research that goes into these videos.
Ricky's Patreon page, please subscribe.
I'm Ricky Vernio coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, and I'll see you soon.